Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Pam Schott. I am a member of the Ivy Alumni Executive Committee, and we are thrilled to have Jackie here today. This is actually a new series that we're introducing to the alumni community under the banner of Alumni Connections. And really the intent here is to leverage the experience that we have across our alumni population to come in and talk about key topics with a focus on obviously things to advance your career, things that are impactful for your personal life, and as well as hot topics in the industry. So for example, an event that we're planning in the next several months will be on AI, ChatGPT. So really trying to get some kind of good cross sectors of topics that we think are impactful to our alumni community, and hopefully helping us to continue on the plans of the School for Lifelong Learning. So with that, Jackie is our very first presenter. Thank you so much for accepting the challenge. I am going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and walk us through the content. For those that are on the phone, we will do Q&A at the end. You can throw questions in the chat. I'll do my best to moderate that at the end. But for now, Jackie, over to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Pam. I am delighted to be here. So I graduated from the Ivy MBA program in 2003. So I had my 20th anniversary this year. Since then, I've worked in many corporate roles. I was at BCG right out of MBA. I worked in loyalty for a number of years, a few years in M&A, and even joined a startup organization where I was employee number 9. And then 3 years ago, I launched Vallejo Leadership, which is a company that is really close to my heart and the things that I'm truly passionate about. So our mission at Vallejo Leadership is to help leaders and organizations reach their true potential and have a meaningful impact in their chosen fields while living a life full of vitality. Now that's a mouthful, and it's something that's actually hard to achieve, but so relevant in the world that we live in right now. My interest in burnout started with a very personal experience. I was burning the candle at both ends, working long hours, traveling a ton, and trying to raise a toddler. The company I worked for at the time was really supportive, but I didn't have the courage or the knowledge to understand and ask for what I needed. And 15 years ago, even the best companies didn't know how to invest in well-being in a meaningful and impactful way. So my journey to create Vallejo Leadership was born out of a desire to help individuals find that sweet spot in life where you're able to succeed at work, have a fulfilling personal and family life, and feel really great mentally and physically. And to help organizations set the culture and the strategy to drive both organizational and people performance. Now, by applying the research and the science from multiple different divisions and disciplines, we've created an approach that helps you as leaders navigate high stress roles and helps your organizations and teams sustain high performance. So today you'll learn about some of those principles and tactics that you can personalize that will yield meaningful results to take you and your teams and organizations from surviving to thriving. Now, I want to kick us off with a poll. Pam, are you able to bring up the first poll?
Let me see.
And if not, I can just read the questions and people can think about their answers.
I think we're going to have to read it. Doesn't look like the polling is working.
No problem. No problem. Okay, so here are some questions to contemplate while you sit at your desk. So what I want you to do is listen to these 4 statements and identify which one of them are true for you. My guess is multiple. Now, number 1, do you check your phone within 5 minutes of waking? Number 2, do you read email or scroll social media in the washroom, or perhaps even while you're on the toilet? Number 3, if you keep your phone next to you within reach while working throughout the day. And finally, if you multitask amongst devices while relaxing. For example, you're on your phone while watching TV in the evening. Now, if we had this as a poll, my guess is that most of us would answer yes to most of those statements. The fact is, we are always on. Our lives are changing, work is changing. As a workforce, we worry about AI and machines replacing the jobs performed by humans. ChatGPT has taken the world by storm, as you all know. But isn't the problem, the bigger concern, that as human beings, we're constantly trying to perform like machines? So what can you do to ensure that you thrive as a human being and allow you to lead your organizations and teams to sustainable peak human performance? Before we get into the content on how to prevent burnout, I'd like to ground us in some of the data around the prevalence and the impact of burnout on both individuals and organizations. So what is burnout? This first definition at the top of the slide is from the World Health Organization. It's quite generic, but it gets at 2 key points. Number 1, burnout, for the most part, specifically refers to the impact of stress at work. And number 2, the fact that stress hasn't been properly managed is what leads to burnout. The second definition from McKinsey hones in on the physical and the emotional aspects resulting from a lack of control and impact. I'm sure many of us can relate to some, if not all, of these symptoms at the bottom of the screen. But the challenge becomes when this becomes the norm and not the exception. All of these symptoms are detrimental to an organization looking to drive performance and profitability, but the human cost for the individual suffering from exhaustion, cognitive and emotional impairment, and a focus on daily survival are devastating, and they can lead to anxiety and depression. According to Deloitte and McKinsey, there are a number of key drivers to burnout. Now, as you look through this list, think about your own organization and your teams. Would your direct reports flag any of these as being present in their lives? The toxic behavior list may seem unlikely in your own teams, but is there any chance you're unaware of this happening in your organization? Would your people feel comfortable coming to you with concerns about this type of behavior? Does the constant push for results and profitability make unethical behavior seem acceptable, all for the sake of quarterly earnings? Gallup, the well-known global analytic and advisory company specializing in providing insights on human behavior and attitudes, recently did a worldwide study called the State of the Global Workforce in 2023. They surveyed well over 100,000 respondents and had a minimum of at least 1,000 respondents per country. At the risk of sounding dramatic, Gallup estimates that low engagement costs the global economy $8.8 trillion a year. That's 9% of global GDP. What they say is enough to make the difference between success and failure for humanity. Now, the next couple of slides will highlight the data for just Canada and the US. We've heard a lot about quiet quitting and the great resignation in the last couple of years, yet I still find these numbers staggering. Only 31% of employees polled are thriving at work, while the balance, 69%, are either quiet quitting or loud quitting. What's important here is that the definition of loud quitting is not just looking for a new job. These employees are taking actions that directly harm the organization. They're undercutting its goals and opposing its leaders. Quiet quitters are just filling a seat and watching the clock. They are psychologically disconnected from their employer and feel lost and disconnected from their workplace. Leadership and management directly influence workplace engagement. And there's a lot that organizations can do to help their employees thrive at work. For leaders and managers, loud quitting can signal major risks within an organization, and they're important not to ignore. But quiet quitters are often your greatest opportunity for growth and change. They're waiting for you, a leader or a manager, to have a conversation with them to encourage them and inspire them. A few changes in how they're managed could turn them into productive team members. Now, on the right side of this slide, these stats point to emotions experienced a lot during the previous day. And 52% of Canadian and US respondents indicate feeling stress a lot, and 18% indicate feeling anger a lot during the previous day. When asked about intent to leave, 47% of US and Canadian employees surveyed reported watching for or actively looking for a new job. Now, what's interesting in this data, and there's a lot on this slide, is that it's all pretty consistent by gender, job level, and work location. But where there's a bigger gap is around age, where 56% of employees less than 40 years old intend to leave their jobs, while 40% over 40 reported the same intention. A little bit later in this presentation, we'll get to some research that the Boston Consulting Company did on the impact of mental health and mental illnesses on young employees in the workforce. And this will become really important as it relates to this stat. In another global study on workplace well-being, the Finnish human performance company, best known for coaching some of the Formula One teams, Pinsa Performance, asked employees whether they would forego a pay rise for additional well-being benefits for themselves and their families. And a staggering 1 in 3 answered yes. And this last stat, according to the Workforce Institute, as of 2023, 80% of employees would rather have good mental health than a high-paying job. What's clear is that employees are looking for our help and our support. Now, there's been agreement for years that the cost of burnout and declining employee well-being was high, but many organizations have gone that next step to quantify this in the last couple of years. Employees who are burned out are 6 times more likely to quit. They miss more days of work. And when they're there, they can barely be present and are just in survival mode. The Boston Consulting Group estimates that the cost to the Canadian economy is around $200 billion a year for mental health and disability just in young employees. And approximately $100 billion of that impact is coming from presenteeism and sick days. Now let's turn to the more positive side of the story. There really is an ROI to investing in employee well-being. Data from 2 different studies, one by BCG in Canada and the other by the Wellbeing Lab in Australia, highlight the improved metrics from employees with higher levels of well-being. They're 125% less likely to burn out, 45% more likely to be satisfied in their jobs, 6 times more engaged, and likely have a 13% increase in productivity. And one last stat that's not on this page that just was released by a recent Oxford working paper finds that the top 100 companies with the highest well-being outperformed the market by 20% between 2021 and 2023. Now that we've built a case for why it's so important to prevent burnout in both yourselves and your teams, I'll break down the strategies and tactics to address both. We'll start with the bucket that I call leading others. Now, at an organizational level, the Boston Consulting Group has identified 4 steps that you can take to truly invest in the mental health and well-being of your employees and to drive higher levels of talent attraction, retention, and productivity. This first step is the approach to approach well-being as you would any other competitive opportunity, by setting a vision, defining objectives, and creating a business plan. Leaders need to be present in developing and communicating this strategy. And like any other business priority, you need to have KPIs and track progress and have embedded accountability for achieving the objectives. The second point is around generative leadership. Now, generative leaders create highly motivated teams and a culture of psychological safety. This model of leadership emphasizes open and fact-based communication, authentic connection, and shared learning and accountability. In this model, people feel heard, seen, and valued under their generative leaders. The third point, resilient employees are empowered to self-manage around their stressors. We'll get more into this when we talk about how to lead yourself, as well as all the tips that apply to leaders such as you working with teams. But what's key here is that stress is going to happen. People will have failures and setbacks. The difference is knowing what helps you get back on your feet quickly and relatively unscathed. And helping your team members recognize this themselves will help to build their resilience now and in the future. Finally, your organization needs available and accessible, truly helpful tools to support the employee well-being. Do you have a reasonable healthcare spending account to allow your employees to access a licensed therapist for more than just a few sessions? Do you use coaches for your leaders to help them navigate the inevitable ups and downs and learn how to leverage their own strengths to thrive in their roles? Have you brought in well-being experts to educate your teams on practical habits to bolster their mental and physical health? So these are all questions to ask yourselves as you think about leading organizations. Now, when it comes to leading your own teams, the important thing here is how you do that sustainably, both for yourself and for your teams. So how can you support your direct reports? Now, some of these tactics may seem obvious, but the magic is in consistently modeling and living them. Fostering psychological safety within the team with clear processes to address mental health issues in a safe and supportive environment. Do you go out of your way to regularly recognize the contribution of each of the members of your team? Could you set yourself a target of providing this type of feedback to one person after every meeting or presentation? Do you model vulnerability? A good friend of mine is a senior leader in a multinational organization, and he shared with me that he regularly speaks to his team about the fact that he's taken up meditation because it helps him keep his head clear and his mindset positive. Do you tell these kind of things to your own team members and share what works for you? Does your team see you as somebody that they could come to if they're having a tough time, can't focus, or feel overwhelmed or hopeless? Now, number 3 can be tricky. Giving your employees as much control over the work that they do can feel risky, but challenging yourself to lean into this is key for their well-being. People need autonomy to feel valuable and capable. Now, luckily, number 4 helps you lean in as a leader to support your people with clear goals and guidance when they need help. Finally, COVID has shown us that there are many ways and many places to get our work done. Within the context of your organizational policies, aim to give your folks as much flexibility as you possibly can to make their careers work in the context of their own lives. This will yield dividends in loyalty and engagement. And just like your health and well-being are essential to allow you to be the very best leaders that you can be, so too are the health and well-being of your employees. We need to take both seriously. We'll shift now to leading self. So what can you do to shore up your own resources and invest in your own well-being so that you don't burn out? The same rules apply to you as they do to the teams you manage. You need autonomy in the work that you do, have clear goals, and seek guidance when you need it. Build flexibility into your own schedules around when and how and where you work, and take your own personal and your own personal life and your health seriously. But on top of these priorities, I'll share some of the research-backed behaviors that, if incorporated consistently, will help you to thrive. At the core of individual well-being is what we call your leadership foundation. Now, you all likely have clear values and a purpose for the companies that you work for and lead. But have you spent much time thinking about your own values that guide your choices and behaviors? Have you thought about what your own ultimate purpose is? When people feel like their work matters and that their purpose is aligned to that of their company, they're more loyal, they're more engaged, and less likely to leave. They're also healthier, more resilient, and more productive. And all of this applies to you as well. So for me, curiosity and connection are two of my values that I often reflect back upon when I feel like I'm out of balance. Am I learning? Do I have enough adventure in my life? And am I spending enough time with people who I truly and deeply connect with? So once you're clear on your values, the next step is to hone in on your own personal purpose. Can you link the work that you do now with the impact you want to have in the world more broadly? Do you find meaning in the work that you're doing? Is it fulfilling? The more time that you can spend living in alignment with your values and your purpose, the more grounded and resilient you'll be. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, these colorful diamonds are the vitality elements that support your well-being. When one of them fails, the whole system falters. So for me, mental energy is about understanding what causes you stress and developing the toolkit to recognize and then optimize your response to stress, both in the moment, but more importantly, over the course of the day, the week, and the year. It's about honing your mindset, your environment, and your habits to allow you to sustain your focus and your energy, both in your personal and your work life. Nutrition doesn't have to be rigid and rules-based, but it's about intentionally choosing the foods, more often than not, that will nourish your body and your brain. Doritos and a Diet Coke, or my favorite, poutine, unfortunately don't fall into that bucket very often. Sleep is the recovery rock star, arguably the most foundational element of your overall performance. Structuring your day to get 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep on a regular basis will have the most significant impact on your physical and cognitive performance and your ability to manage stress. And finally, movement. Well, this may include running triathlons or marathons, but more often than not, it's about finding creative ways to stay fit, injury-free, and energetic in the long run. So let's look at stress a little bit more in detail. This stress performance bell curve, also known as the Yerkes-Dodson law, was developed way back in 1908. And it can be a helpful theory to anchor us as we think about peak performance and how to sustain peak performance over the long term. Yerkes and Dodson were two scientists, and they examined the relationship between stress and performance. Now, the theory dictates that performance increases with stress. We've all been on the far left-hand side of this chart at some time. It's boring and not a great place to be. So stress can be good, and performance increases with stress, but only up to a point. When the demands become too high, performance decreases, and that's where you end up in the freak-out zone, which can often learn to crash and burn if you don't get ahead of it. Now, a common misunderstanding is that you should optimize for that highest peak on the curve. That's not necessarily true. You can't be rocking it all the time. And so what you need to do is give the brain downtime and fluctuate between these modes. Now, the science of human performance is much more complex than this chart, but it does provide a good starting point. So the goal is to stay in that just right zone across the bottom. How do we do that? So for me, I need to understand what physiological symptoms I get when I start to feel stressed. And for me, behaviorally, I get short with my husband and my kids, the people I love the most, and I become pretty barky. Physically, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I can't get back to sleep. As you've heard from my burnout story earlier, I've let this go too far before. And I have to be really, really diligent to not push myself too hard. Knowing how your body responds when the stress is too much for too long will increase your ability, your awareness of where you are on that curve, and put you into a better position to respond. It's also really helpful to share your own stress tells with family members and people who you work with on your teams, your fellow colleagues. It's important to have these conversations so that you have a common language and that you're able to support one another. Let's take a closer look at stress to understand it better. Now, stress can come from many different places, from your environment to the physical demands on the body, to social and interpersonal conflict. And stress is cumulative. That's the most important point from this slide, is that no matter where the stress comes from, you may think it's unrelated, but the body and the brain do not differentiate between sources of stress. So the goal is to increase your own awareness of stress so that you're in a better position to choose how you respond. You can either address the source of the stress, the problem itself, or you can influence your mindset about stress, your emotional response. I'd love to have a poll here. Pam, tell me if the audience polling capability is working yet. And if not, we can just move on.
1 second, let me see. Not yet, we'll have to move on, but we do have a question for whenever we get into Q&A.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here's the question without the audience poll. What's your mindset about stress? Do you believe that it's enhancing or harmful? And I'd like to force you to really answer one or the other and not somewhere in between, just for the sake of this thought exercise. When I've done this poll before, I get about 50-50 response, enhancing and harmful. Well, it turns out that your mindset has a big impact on how stress actually affects you. If you view stress as always negative, something to be avoided, your body and mind rally around this perspective, and you can create a downward spiral of emotional and physical responses. On the other hand, if you believe that stress will have a negative impact on your health and that you have no control over this, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So up until recently, we were taught that stress was bad and that figuring out how to minimize it was the only way to lead a healthy life. But the science has changed in recent years. Dr. Alia Crum from the Stanford School of Psychology and the director of the Stanford Mind and Body Lab is an expert on mindsets and how they shape our response to many things, including stress. Her research proves that you can cultivate a mindset that enables you to grow from stress. You can deliberately harness stress to bring out the very best in yourself rather than to diminish your health and performance. Her peer at Stanford, Dr. Kelly McGonigal, wrote a best-selling book, nonfiction, about the benefits of stress, showing the evidence how stress can improve both your focus and your energy to help you learn. Now, both Kelly McGonigal and Alia Crum have done amazing TED Talks that I highly recommend you look up and watch. So what does all of this say? That for stress, and not the chronic, debilitating, horrific stress that occurs out in the world, but for stress that's caused from work or in your personal lives that can become chronic, if you're optimistic and proactive, and if you have a positive attitude about your situation and your ability to handle the stress, you can actually improve your performance and grow through stressful periods and events. But there's a key here. Hold on a sec. Next slide. Regular recovery is critical. As I mentioned previously when we looked into the stress performance curve, the key to staying in that optimal zone is your ability to oscillate between performance and recovery. Many of you are likely familiar with the need for recovery for elite athletes. When athletes train, they break down muscle, and that's the downward slope. That's the stress on the body. But the strengthening of the muscle actually happens during recovery. And if you don't get enough recovery, you end up worse off. So you actually need sufficient recovery to end up at a level above your starting point. And that's where really true elite and peak performance occurs. The same is true for our mental work. We need a rested and focused brain and body to reach our peak performance. So back to the slide on the vitality elements. The science is clear that recovery is essential to harness growth. So what does that mean for you? There's lots of tactics on this slide, but the most important takeaway is to figure out what's going to work for you. For most people, getting clear on what brings them joy and meaning is the starting point. And once you're clear on this foundation, you move to the tactics on the right. As I said earlier, for me, sleep is really important. I work hard on my mindset, though, encouraging myself rather than beating myself up. I try to focus on what I have control over versus what I can't control. And I try to look at failure, which happens to everybody, as new information rather than a sign that I'm a failure. Now, I prioritize getting as close to 8 hours of quality sleep as I can, as often as I can, but it isn't easy. So I have a few staples in my own pre-sleep routine that tend to work for me. I try to turn my devices off 30 minutes before going to bed, and I try to read a fiction book, not nonfiction, so it doesn't stimulate my brain too much. I also try to set my circadian rhythm first thing in the morning. Dr. Andrew Huberman, who's a neuroscientist at Stanford and has an amazing podcast, talks about the importance of getting sunlight early on in the day so that you can optimize your chances of having a good night's sleep. So even though I work from home, I schedule in a fake commute before my workday starts. I walk around the block without sunglasses on, no hat, trying to get as much natural light as possible for 10 minutes. And surprisingly, it actually does work to set you up for a better sleep in the evening. When it comes to movement, scientists often highlight our ancestry as hunters and gatherers. We aren't meant to be sitting at our desks all day and then moving to our couches at night. Your focus, your concentration, and your energy will improve significantly if you're able to squeeze in even a 5-minute walk between meetings and a stroll after dinner. I've got a stand-up desk here that I'm working from, and I try and move between standing and sitting throughout the course of the day. So when you look at these tools, what jumps out as something that you could integrate into your life? Something that isn't going to rock the boat too much, but will make a small and meaningful difference in the way that you feel. Another poll for you to think about at your desks. One of the elements of the Vallejo Vitality diamonds is the nutritional element of water. So how many liters of water do you think adults should be drinking per day? And this isn't a trick question. Feel free to Google the answer. You don't need to guess. It's an open book pop quiz. Now, the answer is 2 to 4 liters. So most of you were probably right. My guess is that you would have responded in the middle there. But most people don't actually get this much water. Why is that? Why did I put you through that exercise of thinking about how much water we should drink? You're all smart people. And if it's something you don't know, you can just look it up. You're resourceful. You can find the answer. Whether it's related to nutrition, your mindset, managing stress, you can easily learn what's needed. So it's fairly easy to close the knowledge gaps. But behavior change is really hard. Now, there's a slightly comical image on the screen right now. I hope I don't have to explain it. But the point isn't comical. Behavior change is hard. So how do we achieve it? Let me ask another couple of questions. Do you have a to-do list? I'm guessing that most of you do. Let me ask another question. Do you have a to-be list? Is there someone who you want to show up as more in the world, or a way that you want to be that you're working towards? My guess is that less of you actually have this to-be list. James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, shares a really helpful framework for thinking about change, and habits in particular. There are 3 levels at which change can occur: changing outcomes, changing processes, and changing your identity. Outcomes are what you achieve or get, processes are about what you do, and identity is about what you believe. When it comes to building habits, all of them are important, but the direction of the change is critical. What we often do is focus on outcome-based habits. I want to run a marathon, outcome, so I'll start training 3 to 5 times a week, processes, and maybe never actually get to this identity that I am a runner. The alternative is to build identity-based habits. Start by focusing on who you want to be. I'm a runner. Present tense is important. When I work with individuals and organizations on change, we often do a future visualization exercise. And it's really important to think about the future in the present tense. Tell yourself you are a runner and then become a runner. It makes a difference. So first, decide the person that you want to be, and then go and prove it to yourself with small wins. I'll take you through an example from my own life. Reminder: identity, who you are, what you believe; processes, what you do; and outcomes, what you achieve. So I wanted to get back to my youthful days of identifying as an athlete and having movement be purposeful and consistent. So I thought about what kind of system I would need to have in place to support that identity. Now, the outcomes are important, of course, but for me, the outcomes are a function of who I want to be and the system I have in place in order to support that person. To be clear, I'm not telling you to not be goal-oriented. Goals are critical, but to help you achieve them, my challenge to you is to start with an identity, then think about the system, and then think about the outcomes. One of my favorite insights from Atomic Habits is that you do not rise to the level of your goals. Rather, you fall to the level of your systems. Think about that. It's actually important enough to repeat. You don't rise to the level of your goals. Rather, you fall to the level of your systems. So back to the framework. You might have a different identity that you're working on, someone that you want to be that will positively impact your well-being and therefore help get you to a place of thriving in this era of stress and burnout. It can be simple, but start small. Choose an identity that you want to develop that you think will positively impact you and likely others. Then think through the systems that you'll need to support this identity. Think about the systems both at work and at home. And then lastly, identify what you hope to achieve in doing so. So this is your homework. My advice is to do it in the next 48 hours if you can, or it's unlikely that you'll get to it. Take a screenshot of this and feel free to send me your version of this page, and I'd be happy to help you stay accountable to a new habit. So remember, start small. 1% improvements over time add up to make a big difference. I'd like you to take 4 key points away from this presentation. Number 1, you have an obligation as a leader to take care of your people. The culture that you set and the behaviors that you model will have a direct impact on the people that you lead. Treat your team members as human beings first and employees second, and the business results will follow. Number 2, by prioritizing your well-being and fueling your own individual passions, you'll reach your potential and avoid burnout in both work and in life. Number 3, stress can be good for you as long as you're intentional about your mindset and you prioritize recovery. And number 4, behavior change and habit building is most successful when you start with your identity, the person that you want to become, and then build the processes and the systems to achieve your goals. Thank you so much for listening today. Please don't hesitate to reach out for me if you have any questions or want to chat about anything further. My contact information is there. But now we're actually going to turn it over to some of the questions that were coming in during the course of the presentation. Thanks, Pam.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. So we have a couple of comments and questions that have come in from Ash Singh. So I actually think I'm going to read the comment first because I think it's quite funny, which is, I think sleeping on time without devices is tough for Canadians with Netflix and snacks from Costco. I need a service to quit both. And I would agree with you, by the way. It's not the easiest these days. There's just so much stimulation all the time. So he follows up with
completely agree.
Yeah. So sorry. They follow up with two questions / comments. One, I'm going to go in chronological order. One, great statistics on quiet quitting and stress. Do you think that environmental factors outside of the workplace is elevating these numbers? Are employees' expectations higher now than previous generations?
So yes, I believe that elements outside of the workplace are elevating quiet quitting and loud quitting. HINSA, the performance coaching organization out of Finland, whose stats I reported on a couple of times during the presentation, actually just launched a new well-being report where they talk about multiple elements that they've identified through a global survey that they've done recently of factors outside of work that have a massive impact on the stress that people are facing. And the one that was really flagged in my mind that I think many of us will find relevant right now is the financial concerns. So interest rates have skyrocketed in the last couple of years, and people are feeling really financially crunched. And so this financial pressure and stress doesn't just stay at home. This idea that we have a home person and a work person doesn't really exist. You're one person, and the stress that you have at home, you bring into work. But identifying and being aware of it and acknowledging the fact that these financial stressors in people's home lives are having an impact on their work life, I think is really important. And so it comes back to the concept that I talked about earlier, which is being a generative leader. So focusing on your employees as the human beings that they are, and being open and willing to help them and support them as people both at work and outside of work. There have to be boundaries. I'm not saying it's your job to coach people on their financial resilience or resourcefulness, but acknowledging that these stresses have an impact for them at work is important. And do I think that there's a difference and higher expectations for newer generations? 100%. And the BCG report that I quoted earlier as well focused on just 18 to 24-year-olds in Canada and the massive mental health crisis that they're having as employees, but then also how they're beginning to set boundaries and that expectations around what they're willing to put into work are changing as well. And probably for the better. There's healthier boundaries.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that.
Any other questions?
And I think the reality too is that we have, we've spent the last kind of 3 to 4 years in a situation where you feel uncomfortable and you're nervous about being in any situation. And so, that also causes that stress outside of work with COVID and life events and the world right now. So all good impact points. And I think focusing on your stress and making sure you make time for yourself is a great solution. We have one more question that came in. I'm not sure if we're going to get to be able to answer it, but it is positive mindset is very, very difficult concept to change, especially if negative mindset has been ingrained for so long. Is there a neurological solution?
So really good question. And yes, mindset is really difficult to change. There's no silver bullet. And from all of the reading and the research that I've done, it's clear that it takes a while to shift mindset. So I would point you to a couple of really good resources. So as I said earlier on, the neuroscientist, Dr. Andrew Huberman, at Stanford hosts an incredible podcast where he talks specifically about the neuroscience behind many different elements of the human condition. And he's got a couple of episodes specifically on mindset and stress. Dr. Peter Attia, actually a Canadian who's a board certified physician practicing in the US, who focuses on longevity and health span, also has a podcast and has just released a book earlier this spring called Outlive. And it focuses on a lot of the health conditions that are taking us down as a society. But he has one chapter at the end that's all about emotional health and resilience. And he refers to one exercise that he personally has found really helpful and that he works with his patients on to help them change their mindset and stop the critical chatter that is constantly at play for most of us. And so the tactic that one of his therapists helped him to implement was every time that negative mindset pops up or that critical voice comes up in your mind, get out your phone and record a voice memo to yourself, but pretend that you're speaking to your best friend. And so out loud, say the words, because there's a neurological connection between speaking and the emotions that you feel and the neurotransmitters in your brain. So say out loud what it is that you would react, how you'd react to your friend in this circumstance, and give yourself encouraging feedback. And so Peter Attia found that he needed to do this probably 4 or 5 times a day for 4 months. And bit by bit, that negative voice and that negative mindset started to dwindle, and the positive mindset and the encouraging voice started to win over. So there's a couple of resources and a couple of points that may help.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. I'm going to open it up for 30 seconds just to see if we have any questions coming in from our participants, if you want to raise your hand. While we're waiting to see if anybody has a question. Just to kind of close off, first of all, big thank you to Jackie. Amazing session today. Very informative. We had great attendance. So thank you to everybody who joined. We have recorded this. We will share it out to this audience. We also have a leave behind one pager. And I believe we're okay to share the deck, or are we just sharing the one pager?
I think I'm just going to share the one pager.
Okay, no problem. All right. Okay. We don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to close it here. Thank you to everybody who joined today. Look for future Alumni Connection events and sessions. They'll be coming into your calendar shortly. Thank you again. Thank you, Jackie. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.